first time Yue saw that platform, she was riding a train that had absolutely no reason to stop there. It was a Friday night. She had worked late, barely made the last northbound train on the Saihama line, and dropped into a seat with the same hollow, tired look worn by everybody, still commuting after midnight. There were not many people left in the carriage, just a few exhausted office workers scattered here and there, all of them looking as though the day had already taken the last useful thing out of them. Outside the window, the line looked ordinary. An orange maintenance light now and then black hillside, then the tunnel wall sliding by in long dark stretches. At 12:17 a.m., while the train was passing through the long tunnel between Yomi Station and Hakusei Station, it suddenly began to slow. When Yui described it to me later, she said the strange part was not the fact that the train slowed down. It was the way it slowed down, not like an emergency brake, not like some sudden fault. It felt smooth, steady, like the train was calmly preparing to stop at a station. At first, she thought she had mixed up the route because she was too tired. Then, a few seconds later, the carriage announcement actually came on. The female voice in the speaker slowly announced a name. Tsukimiura, doors will open on the right. Yui froze, because there was no station called Tsukimiura on the Saihama line. And yet the doors really did open. Outside them was not a tunnel wall, not a maintenance corridor. It was a platform, an old one, a narrow one, a dim one. Yui told me that even now, the strongest feeling she remembers from that first look is not exactly fear. It was discomfort, a kind of wrongness she could not name at the time. The platform looked real. There were old green ceramic tiles. There was a station sign with pale lettering on a yellow panel. There was a round clock hanging from a pillar. There was even a vending machine with its lights on. And yet everything looked as though it had been left behind many years ago. The clock had stopped at 11:48 p.m. Every row in the vending machine was lit, but the labels on the drinks were all blurred, so badly faded or smeared that no brand name could be read. And the lettering on the sign below the name, Tsukimiura, did not match the current design style used anywhere on the Saihama line. It looked older, like something from a line map that had been retired decades ago. What was stranger still was that there were people standing there, 3 of them. A man in a dark coat, a woman carrying a bag, and a figure who looked like a student. All of them stood outside the yellow safety line, motionless, facing the carriage. Not glancing, not casually waiting to see if the doors would open. They were looking into the train, quietly, directly. Yui was not even that afraid at the time. Confused, yes. Unsettled, yes. But not yet afraid. She even took out her phone and sent me a message. What she sent was, "Brother, did I get on the wrong line? It just stopped at a station called Tsukimiura." I was already asleep by then, so I never answered her. Less than 15 seconds later, the doors shut by themselves. The train moved on. It emerged from the tunnel as if nothing had happened and made its next normal stop at Hakusei Station when Yue got home and told me about it. My first reaction was the same as anybody else. Would have been, I assumed she had been too tired, or that there had been a temporary operational change. It was not until the next day, when we checked the full Saihama line route map, and still could not find any station named Tsukimiura, that I began to feel something was off. Even then, neither of us understood how much worse it was going to get. After that first sighting, something in Yue began to go wrong very slowly. At first, she just could not sleep. She said that every time she closed her eyes, she heard the door chime, that normal little warning melody trains use before the doors open or close. But each time the melody ended, the image of that platform would rise in her mind all by itself. The green tiles, the clock stopped at 11:48, and those 3 people. A few days later, she told me something else. She said she had started to feel that the people on the platform had not been looking at the train at all. They had been looking at her. At the time, I thought she was frightening herself. But Yui was dead serious when she said, "I didn't." He noticed the first time, but when I thought back on it again, I suddenly realized the woman with the bag was facing exactly the door where I was sitting. Not just the carriage, me. I asked her, "What do you mean, when you thought back on it again?" "You only saw it once. She went quiet for a few seconds before she answered. Then she said in a low voice, "Lately, whenever I look at subway windows, bus doors, or the glass doors in shopping malls, I keep having this split second where it feels like that platform is behind the glass." That was the moment I realized this had already moved beyond anything I could dismiss with, "You are overthinking it." My name is Akira Sato. I work as an editor at a publishing house. I am not someone who chases ghost stories. I am not interested in paranormal rumors. If Yue had not truly disappeared afterward, I would never have touched the old Saihama line records that so many people had spent years pretending not to remember. Yue vanished on the 13th day after she first saw Tsukimiura. That night she sent me a message saying she might be home late. I asked where she was. She answered with only one line. I heard the station name again. I called her immediately. No answer. After that, every message I sent vanished into silence. Later, the police pulled the station surveillance and confirmed that she had badged into Yomai Station that night. But they never found footage of her leaving another station, which meant that Yui seemed to disappear right inside the last train on the Saihama line. Naturally, the police were never going to accept the idea of a platform that did not exist. They leaned towards something more ordinary. Maybe she had gotten off at another stop. Maybe she had avoided cameras. Maybe she had cut off contact for personal reasons. But I knew Yui too well. She was not the sort of person who vanished without a trace. So from the moment she disappeared, I started investigating on my own. The first thing I did was try to find other passengers who had ridden that last train with her that night. That turned out to be even harder than I expected. Night traffic on the Saihama line is thin. Very few people are willing to leave contact information, and even fewer are willing to talk. Most people, when I asked whether the train had made an unusual stop inside the tunnel that night, immediately said no and hurried off the phone. But there were a small number who, after a very long silence, finally admitted that yes, they had once seen something they could not explain. The first person willing to speak plainly with me was a night shift nurse named Risa Morikawa. She told me that 2 years earlier, at the same time of night, and in the same tunnel, she had witnessed exactly the same thing. The train slowed. The announcement named a station that did not exist. The right side doors opened, and outside them was an old platform. She said the most frightening part was not that a station had somehow appeared inside a tunnel. It was how quiet the people on the platform were. They weren't waiting for a train, she told me. It felt more like they were checking what was inside ours. I asked whether she had seen their faces clearly. She shook her head. But I remember one thing. When I lifted my hand to adjust my hair, the woman on the platform moved too, almost at the same time. That sentence sent a chill down my back. What do you mean? I mean, I raised my hand and she raised hers. At first I thought it was a coincidence. Then I lowered mine, and she lowered hers almost a second later too, not like a mirror. More like she was copying me half a beat late. I asked what happened after that. Risa Morikawa said that beginning the next night, she had the same dream over and over for more than 10 days. In the dream, it was always the same platform, always the same clock stopped at 11:48, but the number of people standing there slowly increased. 3, then 4, then 5, then 6. And the last position that appeared was always empty for a while first, as though it had been left open for somebody who had not arrived yet. Not long after that, she quit working night shifts and never rode the last Saihama line train again. The second person willing to talk was a retired train operator named Shuichi Kuroda. At first, he refused to meet me. It was only when I mentioned the message Yui sent just before she vanished, I heard the station name again, that the line went silent. Long enough for me to realize something had changed on his end. When we finally met in person, the first thing he asked me was, "Did your sister look too long?" That question caught me completely off guard. Shuichi Kuroda said there had always been an old unofficial rule passed around by Saihama line crews. If the last train somehow opened its doors inside the tunnel, and there happened to be a platform outside that you had never seen in your life, there were 3 things you absolutely must not do. First, do not say the station name out loud. Second, Do not count how many people are standing on the platform. Third, do not make eye contact with anyone outside. I asked him where that rule came from. He said no one knew anymore. Old drivers told younger drivers. Some people treated it like a ghost story and laughed it off. Others, when they really had to run the final service through K13, instinctively avoided even bringing it up. Shuichi Kuroda also told me that he had personally seen Tsukimiura once, when he was young. That was in the late 1990s, back when he was still an assistant driver. One night there had been a signal irregularity, and the train made a short stop inside the K13 tunnel. The doors never opened that time. But when he looked out from the side window of the cab, he clearly saw a section of platform edge where no platform should have existed along the tunnel wall to the right. The lights were dim. The station sign could not be read clearly, but he could see shapes standing there. The older driver training him cursed at him immediately and ordered him to turn his head back. Why? Shuichi Kuroda looked terrible when I asked. Then he said, because it wasn't that the train had reached a station. The station had come over to us. I thought about that sentence for a very long time afterward. The station had come over to us, which meant that in the minds of the people who had really seen Tsukimiura, it was not a hidden station permanently attached to some secret branch of the line. It was something closer to a place that briefly pressed up against reality under the right conditions, at the right time, in the right stretch of track. After that, I began digging through old Saihama line records. That turned out to be far harder than I imagined. There was no mention of Tsukimiura anywhere in the public materials. The official expansion history of the line was complete. The station additions were recorded. The renovations were recorded. The closures were recorded. Only the name I needed seemed to have been scraped clean out of everything. If a local transportation historian had not agreed to help me privately, I doubt I would have found even the first real fragment. His name was Professor Miyamoto. Before retirement, he had taught modern transportation history at a local university. After I finished telling him about Tsukimiura, he sat in silence for almost half a minute, then went into the back room and returned carrying a paper box. Inside it were stacks of photocopied documents. One of them was an abandoned planning sketch from the Saihama Line expansion project. And on it, for the first time, I saw the name in writing. The Tsukimiura Temporary Refuge Platform 2, according to the sketch. It was never meant to be a full passenger station. Originally, it had only been a temporary emergency platform built beside the K13 tunnel during the northern expansion phase. A place meant for engineering vehicles, emergency stop evacuations, and work crews. Later, a construction accident occurred in that section. Part of the tunnel wall collapsed, and several workers were killed. The expansion plan was canceled. The temporary platform was sealed off, which meant that, in theory, Tsukimiura had never actually entered public passenger service at all. If that was true, then what exactly had all those passengers and crew members been seeing when they described a fully formed station? Professor Miyamoto told me that was not even the strangest part. The stranger part came 7 years later. There had been another accident inside the railway system that was never publicly disclosed. The only trace of it appeared in a very old internal safety meeting summary. The relevant line was brief enough to look almost intentional in its vagueness. Abnormal right side door opening event in K13 section. One onboard support staff member, unaccounted for. No name, no detail, no public follow-up, like everything connected to Tsukimiura. It had been pushed into a part of the archive. No one expected anyone to read carefully ever again. But even that was still not enough, because what I wanted to know was not only what Tsukimiura had once been. I wanted to know how UI had seen it. Why some people could spend an entire lifetime on the line and never encounter it once. Why others, after seeing it only one time, seemed to get marked by it somehow, and never completely escape it again. It was only later that I found a third kind of witness, not a passenger, not a driver, a dispatcher. His name was Makoto Kawashima. He had been retired for years by the time I found him. When I first reached him, he was openly hostile to any mention of K13. But after hearing that my sister had vanished, he reluctantly agreed to meet me once. Makoto Kawashima told me that inside the Saihama line system, There had always been an unwritten way of handling certain anomalies. If the last train passing through the K13 tunnel caused the monitoring system to flash something like "right side platform confirmed," dispatchers usually did not report it immediately as a major fault, because most of the time that alert would flash once and disappear. The train would continue normally the next second. If they escalated it every time as a full emergency, it would create a level of panic far greater than anything they knew how to explain. I asked him, "So you all knew?" He did not answer directly. Instead, he said that dispatchers had noticed a pattern long ago, whenever a passenger later made a formal complaint, saying the train had opened its doors inside the tunnel and stopped at a station that should not exist. The arrival head count on that train often failed to match the departure count. Sometimes there was one fewer passenger. Sometimes there was one more. One more. Yes, Makoto Kawashima said, nodding once. There were times when the final count at the terminal came out one higher than the number that had boarded at the previous stop. But when we reviewed the carriage surveillance, there was no clear record of anybody entering the train halfway through. My whole body went cold when he said that, because it meant the worst possibility was not simply that people were being taken away. Sometimes something might also be coming back with the train. Then Kawashima told me something even harder to sit with. When Tsukimiura appears, the passengers in our carriage see a platform, but the other side may also be seeing a train. I asked him what that meant. He said that during the internal accident in 1992, the onboard support staff member who disappeared had left one final line over the intercom before contact was lost. The original recording no longer existed. Only a paraphrased note remained in the meeting summary. "There is another train on the right. The people inside are all staring at us." I left Makoto Kawashima's house that day under a fine, cold drizzle. While I stood under a station sign waiting out the rain, that one sentence kept repeating in my head. There's another train on the right, which meant that Tsukimiura might not be a stationary platform at all. It might be a crossing point, when our last train pulled alongside it in that moment. Perhaps another train on the other side was pulling in the same way. We believed we were looking at an impossible platform, and maybe the people on the other side believed exactly the same thing about us. That idea suddenly explained far too many witness details. Why the figures on the platform always seemed to be looking into the carriage. Why some people said they were copying movements from inside the train. Why those who made eye contact never seemed able to forget the place afterward. Because from the beginning, they had not been waiting for a train. They had been identifying people. In the third month after Yue disappeared, I finally found a recording on her computer that I had overlooked earlier. It was a voice memo she had made in the middle of the night after coming home from that first Tsukimiura stop. Her voice in it sounded exhausted and disordered. Most of the recording was just her repeating the same things. "I didn't get on the wrong train. I really saw the station sign. It wasn't some maintenance passage." But at the very end of the recording, she suddenly paused, as if a forgotten detail had just pushed its way back into memory, and then said in a very low voice, "There weren't only 3 people on the platform. There was also a door." At the time, I thought it was maybe part of an ad panel. But now that I think about it, it might have been a carriage door too. The moment I heard that, all the warmth in my body disappeared. Because on the night Yori first saw Tsukimiura, the doors had remained open for barely a few seconds. And yet, in those few seconds, she had already seen another door. Which meant she had probably seen the other train that first night. She just had not understood what she was looking at yet. Once I put all of this together, I finally made the decision to ride the last Seihama Line train myself. A lot of people told me not to do it. Makoto Kawashima more than anybody else. He practically shouted at me over the phone. But by then, I did not have any other option left. If Yui was really trapped somewhere along whatever boundary that line crossed at night, then my only remaining chance of seeing her again was to go there myself. That night I told no one where I was going. I brought only a small camera and a photo of Yui when the last train left Yumai station. The carriage was even quieter than I had imagined. There were only 7 people inside, 2 office workers with their heads down over their phones, one middle-aged man who smelled of alcohol, a young couple sitting far apart from everyone else, and one girl who kept staring out the window without blinking much at all. I took a seat by the door on the right side of the carriage, and from the moment the train entered the tunnel, My palms would not stop sweating. It was 12:17 a.m. when we passed into the K13 stretch. The first thing I heard was not the announcement, it was a melody. The normal Tsukimiura line door chime lasts only a couple of seconds. But the one I heard that night ran longer than usual, and in the second half it slowed down unnaturally, as if an old tape machine were losing power. Then the train began to slow, for real. Outside the window had been nothing but the flat black wall of the tunnel. But as our speed dropped, light began to bloom through the darkness. Not work lights, not signal lamps, platform lights. The yellowed, tired kind of light used in old stations. Then the announcement came. Tsukimiura, doors will open on the right. The instant the doors slid open, every hair on my body stood up, because outside them was exactly the place Yui had described. The green tiles, the clock frozen at 11:48, the worn station sign. The vending machine lit from within but impossible to read, and there were 4 people standing there now. One more than Yui had seen the first time. My first instinct was to count them. But almost in the same moment that urge appeared, I remembered Shuichi Kuroda's warning and forced myself to look away. That was when I noticed something farther to the right. There really was another train there, not fully visible. Only part of a carriage, a row of dark windows, a few colder white interior lights, and silhouettes sitting inside, watching us. I still do not know how to describe that feeling properly. It was like suddenly realizing that what you thought was scenery had been watching you back the entire time. Visible carriage were sitting in positions disturbingly similar to the people inside ours. One figure near the window with their head lowered. One man in the middle slumped at an angle, as if asleep. One person near the door sitting unnaturally straight. It felt as though the 2 trains were not merely side by side by accident. They corresponded to each other. Then, from farther back on the platform, one more figure slowly stepped forward. It was Yui, or something that looked exactly like Yui. She was wearing the same pale gray coat she had been wearing on the night she disappeared. Her hair was the same length. She did not wave to me. She did not call my name. She simply stepped out from behind the other figures, stopped beyond the yellow line, and looked quietly into the train. At that point, I was almost out of my seat. But the moment my hand pressed against the edge of the seat to stand, I noticed one detail so small that under any normal circumstance I might have missed it. The figure on the platform that looked like Yui was not wearing the black cord bracelet she always wore around her left wrist. And another detail struck me immediately after that. She was not actually facing me. She was facing the other train, which meant she was not looking at me at all. She was looking at someone inside the opposite carriage. At that exact moment, the girl in my carriage who had been staring out the window all this time said very softly, "There is another me in there." Her voice was quiet, but I heard every word. I turned toward her. Her face had gone white as paper, and her eyes were fixed on the opposite train. The next second, she stood up and moved toward the open door. I reached for her almost by instinct, but she was faster than I was, and just as the tip of her shoe touched the platform edge, the lights inside our carriage flickered once. The doors slammed shut immediately. She did not make it out, but what froze my blood was what I saw when the doors closed. The 4 people on the platform had become 5, and the extra one standing there was the girl who had just been inside our carriage. At the same time, our carriage no longer contained her. Everything happened so quickly that the other passengers had not even fully understood what had happened before the train started moving again. The next second, we were gliding out of the tunnel as though nothing unusual had occurred at all. I stood by the door shaking. The glass reflected my own face and the faces of the remaining passengers. But in the darkest layer of that reflection, for a fraction of a second, I thought I saw another version of myself, standing by the door in the opposite train, looking back this way. Once the train cleared the tunnel, everything returned to normal. Akuse Station arrived. The announcement sounded ordinary. The lights were normal. The people on board stepped off one by one as if the trip had never contained anything out of the ordinary. But I knew something had shifted permanently. Because when I got home and checked the camera footage from that night, It contained something more terrifying than what I had managed to catch with my own eyes. In the moment, the first half of the recording matched my memory. The train slowed. The announcement named the station. The doors opened. The platform appeared. But when I paused the footage, zoomed in, and dragged through it frame by frame, I found a detail I had missed. By the door of the half-visible opposite carriage, there was somebody standing, and that person was UA. Which meant that on the night I rode that train, the UA on the platform and the UA inside the opposite carriage existed at the same time. One standing on the platform of Tsukimiura, one standing inside the other train. That was the first time I truly understood why some people insisted Tsukimiura was not really a station at all. It was a meeting point, not just an impossible platform stuck inside a tunnel. It was more like two routes that should never have touched. Pressing briefly against each other at a fixed hour deep in the night, we thought the other side was a platform. Maybe the other side thought we were. We believed they should not exist. And to them, perhaps we were equally impossible. The most frightening part was what followed from that. Once, during those few seconds of overlap, you really recognized who the person on the other side was. It became very difficult to pull yourself away from the stop afterward. That was probably what happened to Yui. After she saw Tsukimiura the first time, she kept seeing it again and again in glass, in reflections, in doors and in windows. Not because she frightened herself into hallucinations, but because, in some sense, the other side had already recognized her. Later, I took the recording to Makoto Kawashima. He watched it in a silence even longer than the one he had kept the last time we met. When the video ended, he said only one sentence: "Your sister may not be dead, but do not go a second time." I asked him why. He said, "The worst thing about Tsukimiura isn't whether you step off the train. It is that, if you keep trying to get somebody back, sooner or later, you are going to want to see clearly whether they were really there on the other side. And the moment you truly want to see clearly, UV already started leaning toward it. I never went back a second time, not because I did not want to bring UA home, but because I knew that if I kept pursuing it, all I would do was create one more disappearance. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Half a year after Yui vanished, I was riding a perfectly ordinary subway line in the city center. Nothing at all to do with the Saihama line. As the train approached a station, I suddenly heard a tiny melody in my ear. The same slowed down chime, the same half beat drag in the second half. My whole body locked up. The doors opened. Outside was just a normal station. Commuters everywhere. Advertising panels, platform screen doors. Everything completely ordinary. But in that same moment, my phone vibrated. It was a text message delayed by half a year. From UA, it contained only one line. "Brother, there is another train outside too. They re-watching us. Don't get off, even now." I do not know whether that message was the product of some bizarre system delay, or whether it came from somewhere a message should not have been able to come from at all. I only know that after that night, I never again took the last train on any line if I could avoid it. And I never again stared too long into a tunnel window, because if Tsukimiura really exists, then its true horror is not simply that there is a platform that should not exist. The real horror is that it may not belong to one place at all. It is more like a moving point of overlap. Sometimes it presses itself against your train, sometimes against your window. Sometimes it only lets you see, through the glass, that there are people on the other side, wearing the same frightened expression, wondering whether they are the ones who have just seen a station that should not exist. And maybe, to them, we are the impossible platform. Maybe those silent figures standing beyond the yellow line are not really trying to determine whether the train will stop at all. Maybe what they truly want to know is which one of us will be the first to fail to resist and look closely enough to recognize who is standing on the other side. So if one day you are on the last train through a long tunnel, if the train suddenly begins to slow, if the announcement names a station you have never heard of, if the doors really do open and outside them is a platform that looks old in a way the present should not allow, do not say the station name out loud. Do not count how many people are standing there. And do not make eye contact with anyone looking into the carriage, because you never really know whether what is watching you from the other side is a platform that does not exist, or another train full of people who are just as certain that they are the ones who took the wrong route. I am Mr. Green Cap. Stay off that last train. I'll see you in the next one.